Well, it just mimics the time of the Soviet Union, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, they're threatening more sanctions against Russia. It was certainly in a period of escalating conflict between the West and Russia.
The Cuban Missile conflict took place when Washington was led by a man who, like Jimmy Carter, had some measure of decency and integrity within him, even while he was playing games with Marilyn Monroe and so on. Jack Kennedy was genuinely sorry over the attempt by the CIA to overthrow the Indonesian government. He was genuinely sorry of the fact that the Zionists had taken control through an agreement, a contract, of a mountain of gold in Indonesia, which was being mined. And the Indonesian government could not recover it. The contract was signed by the previous Dutch government. And when Kennedy became president of the United States, he made an effort to try to correct these wrongs. And that was when he reached out to Sukarno and invited Sukarno to come to Washington. And to his credit, Sukarno was courageous enough to accept the invitation because there was a lot of hatred for the United States in Indonesia. After all, the Indonesians had shot down an aeroplane and captured the pilot, the American pilot who worked for the CIA. And when they captured that pilot, and he confessed that I worked for the CIA, and this is a CIA plot to overthrow the government, that man would have faced a death penalty in Indonesia. His wife in the United States appealed to Sukarno to forgive her husband and set him free. And Sukarno showed magnanimity by forgiving the man and sending him back to his wife. There was a lot of hatred for the United States in Indonesia. So when Kennedy invited Sukarno, it was a surprise. But Sukarno accepted that. A surprise that the invitation was extended, and a surprise that he accepted. And the Zionists didn't like that one bit. And don't you ever forget that the Soviet Union was created by the Zionists. When Sukarno went to the United States, they planned for him, the press, the media, to try to destroy him at the very beginning. So at the first press conference, they cornered him. Mr. President, what's the difference between an American politician and an Indonesian politician? The question was loaded because they wanted to have a discussion on American democracy and Indonesian democracy. That's what they wanted. Sukarno had a brilliant reply. He said, American politicians kiss the baby and shake the mother's hands. Indonesian politicians shake the baby's hand and kiss the mother's. The Zionist press was appalled because there was no way they could respond to this man. The rest of America was laughing. The rest of America loved him. Jack Kennedy loved him because both Jack Kennedy and Sukarno loved women. And he didn't have any problem for the rest of his talk. Jack Kennedy supported Sukarno for Indonesia to recover control of the gold, the mining of gold. The Zionists didn't like that. And so when Kennedy was assassinated, and thank Allah that we now have a confession from Jackie Kennedy herself, Jacqueline Kennedy, that she says, I suspect Lyndon Johnson to be the man who was a part and parcel of the assassination of my husband. She just said that. It just came out. As soon as Kennedy was assassinated, what's the first thing that Johnson did? The very first thing that Johnson did was to reverse American policies on Indonesia. That's what the first thing. The Cuban Missile Crisis has to be understood in the context of a Zionist world order which is becoming increasingly...
Indonesia is the most populous Muslim country in the world, is that right?
After the world of Islam had been broken up into bits and pieces, then one of the pieces is Indonesia, and it's the biggest of the pieces. Instead of saying it's the biggest Muslim country in the world, you could say out of the many pieces that now exist, this is the biggest piece. Yeah, this is the biggest piece, yeah. Okay, we were talking about Indonesia and the United States, Indonesia and the Zionists in the context of the Cuban Missile Crisis, to get a better handle on Kennedy, and to go behind the scenes to try to discern the story which has never as yet been told, in respect of the confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States over Cuba. That story has never yet been told, and I don't think that I myself totally understand it, but I have some inklings of what it could be, the inner story. Yeah. Now, when one of the reasons why they so badly wanted Sukarno, that they eventually had to pull off that stunt with Suharto, who was a junior military officer, and they had to slaughter 5, I think, Indonesian generals of the armed forces. 5 of them were killed in order for Suharto to take over the country. And the other one jumped out of the window and saved Nasution. And then Suharto proceeded to rule over Indonesia on behalf of the Zionists for some 30 years until his time was up. But one of the reasons why they so badly wanted Sukarno, I never knew it, was that when Indonesia became independent of the Dutch, Sukarno called in some of the scholars of Islam to talk to them about the Indonesian money. And after he heard what the scholars of Islam had to say, he offered a proposal, suggestion, that the Indonesian rupiah in paper would function essentially as a promissory note, as a check, and it would be redeemable in gold at the rate of 20 Indonesian rupiah, being equivalent to 2 ounces of gold, or 2 ounces of gold, probably. A scholar, an Indonesian scholar, wrote a book on the gold dinar and the silver dirham in the context of Indonesia. And in that book, he documented this information from direct sources, that this was what Sukarno wanted. But this is not what the Zionists wanted. No. They wanted a monetary system that could be disengaged from gold. And that's why the Articles of Agreement of the International Monetary Fund, which was, I think, in 1945, 44, 45, prohibited the use of gold as money. Yeah. So this is yet one more reason why the Zionists and the CIA were gunning for Sukarno and Indonesia. Now, what is the untold story behind the Cuban Missile Crisis? I am sure one day it will come out. But I'm sure that what we know of as the official story of 2 combatants who are in mortal combat with each other, and it could have come about to a nuclear war. That could have happened, a nuclear war. I believe, Maurice, that there's more to it than meet the eye. I believe that the Cuban Missile Crisis may have offered an opportunity for those who wanted to get rid of Kennedy, to give him a battering in the polls, to make him unpopular. The fact that Kennedy was able to make a deal with the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union agreed to withdraw her missiles from Cuba in exchange for an American withdrawal of missiles from Turkey. That agreement was never published. The world never knew about that agreement. All that the world knew was that the Soviet Union had agreed to withdraw her missiles from Turkey, from Cuba. That Kennedy was able to save himself from a lynching from American people. I hope that one day that story will come out of what was the behind the scenes in the Cuban Missile Crisis. But the Soviet Union acted on behalf of the Zionists, clearly, without any doubt, in handing over Crimea to Ukraine in 1954. And then the Zionist plan unfolded with the dismantling of the Soviet Union, so that NATO could then take over all the states in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, which were not a part of Russia. And NATO proceeded to do precisely that. But the apple of all was Ukraine, to get Ukraine to become a member of NATO. If Ukraine could become a NATO member, by Russia in Crimea. And that's what happened last December, after April, with the demonstrations in Kiev, and eventually the Ukrainian president having to flee. The way Russia responded, I told you, gave to the Zionists the most significant setback they've ever experienced in their history, with the loss of Crimea. So Russia remains firmly in control of a naval base, and Russia remains a naval power in the Black Sea. Now all that remains is for the drama to play out in Ukraine, which eventually might lead to the big war. Zionists have to choose when they want to have big war. But Russia is showing that she's not prepared to back down. No, she's not prepared to back down. And she's going to give you tit for tat. Every single ruse and deception you use against her, she'll use it against you. And so she's doing that now in Ukraine. It's inevitable that the big war will take place. That's inevitable. And the inevitable that when the big war takes place, I believe Paris is going to wipe out Europe and North America. Nobody can live in Europe and North America after that big war, because it's thousands of nuclear weapons that are going to be used. And this is what Israel wants. But the good news is that Russia will survive Armageddon. Russia will survive the Malhama. How do we know that? We know that from the prophecy of Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, about the conquest of Constantinople in the end time. And both Christian eschatology and Islamic eschatology speak with one voice on this issue of the conquest of Constantinople in the end time. From the side of Islam, we know more, that the conquest of Constantinople will take place on the basis of an alliance between Muslims and Orthodox Christians. There's only one military significance, only one, of such a conquest of Constantinople. It'll break the back of NATO in Constantinople, and therefore release the Bosphorus from the control of the Zionists. And the release of the Bosphorus from the control of the Zionists has only one military implication. That's of significance. And that is that the Russian Navy can now pass through the Bosphorus. So when we read, we realize that Russia is going to survive this big war, and the Russian Navy will still survive. Wars will not be fought after the nuclear war with anything in the sky. No. After the big war, the wars are going to be fought on the land and on the sea. And Russia will remain a naval power. And that navy, the Russian navy, is going to threaten Israel.
Quite an education, and an amazing parallel with the Cuban Missile Crisis and what is happening today with Ukraine. I mean, NATO would gladly put missiles in Ukraine.
In the case of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Russia was still under the control of a Zionist-created Soviet Union. So the Zionists had control on both sides. But with Kennedy, that control is beginning to slip out of their hands. And we saw a dramatic example of that in Kennedy's relationship with Sukarno in Indonesia. This story of Kennedy and Sukarno is still so sensitive that the man who wrote that book, let me show it to you. Hold on a minute. His name is Sheikh Al-Faroji. He's Indonesian. And this is his book. This is his book. Yeah. Sheikh Al-Faroji. It is not in English. It is in Indonesian. But he gave me a copy. This is the manuscript, not the published one. It's still being published. Manuscript form. The Return of Dinar Dirham by Sheikh Al-Faroji Asmar Khan, who's Hafiz of the Quran. That book had to be censored in order to be published. And he had to take out of the book certain portions of the things that I have just mentioned in my interview with you.
To understand, if I say ilmu akhiru zaman, eschatology is a big word. Our topic today is that Islamic eschatology is the key to understanding the modern strategic, political, economic, and monetary reality of the world. There are dots, D-O-T-S, dots in strategic affairs, like balance of military power in the world. There are dots in political affairs, in economic affairs, in monetary affairs. And we say that it is with eschatology that we can connect the dots. It's like the stars in the sky above. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares in the Quran, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح إلى آخر الآية. And we have surely adorned, made beautiful the sama ad-dunya with lamps. Why does he use the word lamp for a star? The stars twinkle, they give starlight, it's nice and pretty, but Allah speaks of them as lamps. And nothing happens in the Quran by accident. There must be a reason why He has described the stars in the sky as lamps. For the untrained eye, the one who simply goes to work in the morning facing morning traffic, and then come back home in the evening facing evening traffic, and then has biryani for dinner, and sits down and watches television until it's time for sleep. For him, they will always remain just stars which are twinkling, nothing more. It's pretty, that's all. They'll never become lamps. But for the astronomer, for the one who is sailing a ship in the ocean and wants to know in which direction he must travel, Allah has put the stars up in the sky for a purpose, that they might function as lamps. A lamp gives you light with which to see, so you can know in which direction to walk or to travel. But in order for the lamps, in order for the stars to function as lamps, you've got to learn how to connect the dots. How are the stars connected to each other? And that requires effort. It requires study. It requires dedication. It requires sacrifice. Something which is in short supply today, because so many other things are there to take up our time. But we are here today at Yayasan Restu with the hope that we might touch your hearts, and that you would now recognize the verses of the Quran to be like the stars in the sky. And that when once you learn to recognize each verse of the Quran as a lamp, and you learn to connect them together, then Islamic eschatology will explain to you what's happening in the world today in terms of strategic affairs. Why is Russia being targeted now? Is this something which has just started with Ukraine? Or have they been planning for Russia for a long, long time now? What's happening in the world of politics? Is it by accident that the world is moving in the direction of submitting to one world government? Is this the end of the Ummah of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam? What a shame, what a disgrace that the Ummah of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, the world of Islam, about which Allah says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ. You are the best community raised for the sake of mankind, because you have a mission to stand up for what is right and just and virtuous, and to stand up against what is wrong and unjust and oppressive, and to do so based on faith in Allah. But now today, if you want to stand, you've got to get permission of the Security Council of the United Nations. If you want to stand up for or you want to stand up against, it's Washington who has to approve. What a shame, what a disgrace for the Ummah of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. And when will someone stand up and say so? The economic reality of the world today is that all of mankind is being brought into one world market. And it's a market of thieves. The Quraysh chose to wage economic war on Islam. And for 3 years, they imposed an economic boycott. Quraysh imposed, you must have heard the term, economic sanctions against Muslims. No one will buy from you, no one will sell to you. Did Islam ever respond to use trade as a weapon? Did Islam ever wage economic warfare, ever? Is there anything in the Quran, anything in the Sunnah, even remotely resembling economic warfare? No. Islam gave to the world a free and a fair market. A market which does not recognize any special privileges for a Muslim over a non-Muslim. All are equal in the market. A market in which we are allowed to conduct trade even with the enemy. Islam has never prohibited us from conducting trade with the enemy. All that Islam has prohibited is when you are at war, you may not trade in weapons of war. Today, those who control the world economy gleefully, lustfully seek to impose economic sanctions as part of a strategy to bring down those who resist their rule. And the latest is now they're taking on Russia with economic sanctions. We say to you, compared to what Islam has offered to the world, you belong to the garbage bin. Ours is a world in which there is no economic warfare. Ours is a world in which we do not use trade and business to wage war. Ours is a world in which there is free trade, even with the enemy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran has ordered us to conduct trade and business in such a way that there is mutual satisfaction. إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً عَنْ تَرَادٍ مِّنْكُمْ. This is what Islam has offered. And look at the rubbish that you are offering now, with your latest threats to impose economic sanctions on Russia. Islam gave to the world money. Money which was real money. Money which had intrinsic value. The value of the money is inside the money. The money was created by Allah, not by George Soros. The value of the money can rise and fall based upon demand and supply in the market for gold and silver and so on. But these are natural forces, not artificial forces. Those who today control power in the world have taken the dinar and dirham out of the market, while our scholars of Islam, excuse my language, while our learned and distinguished scholars of Islam, our muftis, our maulanas, our sheikhs, our ustad, who are eating roti canai and drinking teh tarik, they took the dinar and dirham out of the market. They have prohibited the use of dinar and dirham as money. They have made haram what Allah made halal. And anyone who knows even a little bit of the Quran would know that to make haram what Allah made halal, to prohibit what Allah has permitted, is an act of shirk. And please pronounce that word the way it is in the Quran. Don't change it in your Malay language. The word is shirk. One syllable, not two. Shirk. Why are we facing this reality today? Strategic, political, economic, monetary. From whence the banking system, which uses this new money. It used to be paper money once upon a time. It's not going to be paper for much longer. Paper is going. And beyond paper, it's going to be electronic money. You can't see, you can't touch. And those who have the intellectual acumen of donkeys would welcome. This is progress. It's a cashless world now. And so the banks can now lend an unlimited amount of money. There is no limit. The sky is the limit. Because you don't have to print the paper anymore. That's long time. You need a printing press, you need paper, you need ink, you need armored vehicles, you need security personnel to move it around. No more of that. Now you simply write a check for $7 trillion and send it to the Federal Reserve. That's all. And while these are eating their roti canai and drinking teh tarik, they're taking over the world. And when the bank has 1 ringgit, it can lend 10. They call it fractional reserve banking. But I call it, you're stealing it, you're thieves, legalized theft. What is it that explains this strategic, political, economic, monetary reality of the world today? It's not just political and economic and monetary. In the world of religion, can you imagine an Arab, the son of an Arab, the grandson of a sheikh, and if you hand him a copy of the Quran, he can't read it. He can't read Arabic. Can you imagine it? Millions Millions of Arabs today no longer perform salat. They have abandoned it. Can you imagine this? What's happening in the world? If those are the Arabs, and the Quran is in Arabic, and mashallah, 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 Yaya San Restu, look at the work you are doing for the Quran, mashallah. What's happening in the world of religion? The religion is receding. وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَخْرُجُونَ مِن دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. People are leaving religion. Not just Islam. In Britain, nobody goes to church anymore. So churches and monasteries, which are hundreds of years old, and now they're being sold. Sometimes it's a KFC that buys a church. Sometimes it's a bingo hall that buys a church. And quite often it's Muslims who buy the church and convert it to a masjid. Maurice here is from Britain, who is sitting in front of me. He can tell you that religion is receding. And when religion recedes, then values become strange. There used to be such a thing as absolute values, universal values. That you must be honest, honest in trade, honesty. But then comes secular values, and values become relative now. Well, if it is good for me, then I do it. And if it's not good for me, it's no longer good. And so, values are collapsing around the world. Is this happening by accident? Strange things are happening in the Holy Land, which are crying out for an explanation. And it seems to us as though the strategic reality of the world today is somehow related to the Holy Land. And so to the economic reality, so to the monetary reality and so on, connected to the Holy Land. And we say, it's eschatology that will connect the dots for you. I want to refer to a book entitled, it's in French, La guerre eschatologique by Hervé Rissin. Is that how you pronounce it? Any French-speaking speaker? No French-speaking? Hervé Rissin. And the name of the book is La guerre eschatologique, or the war, eschatological war. Recently published. I wrote to the publisher to order a copy. It's in French, so I've got to read slowly. My French is not that good. The publisher decided, no, we're going to send a copy to you free of charge as a gift. And the copy arrived at the mail. I wish I had it with me today. One friend of mine, I lent it to him to read. But he compares Christian eschatology and Jewish eschatology and Muslim eschatology in this book. And before we take up our subject, let me share with you some of his comments. He says that eschatology teaches us that these three religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, are incompatible with each other for the simple reason that their future, their vision of the future diverge on this fundamental point, that at the end of time, one and only one must triumph. The others must be converted among Christians and among Muslims, or they must disappear altogether. Among Jews, in fact, there is not a will to convert others to Judaism. Entire Jewish activism and all the propaganda put by the Jewish intellectuals through their speeches, their films, their novels, etc., is to discredit the idea of religion, of race, of homeland, and any sense of belonging among others in order to raise the Jews above the mass of the Goyim. They think that when all nations have been destroyed, transformed into multicultural societies, when all religions have been obliterated, and when a world government has been established, probably after the Armageddon or the Great War or the Malhama, then an absolute and definitive peace will reign over the world. That's when the long-awaited Messiah will come. Jews who have kept their traditions will then be recognized by all of mankind as the chosen people of God Almighty. Alvi Hussein continues to speak now about Islam. He says, in Islam also there is the idea that the whole world must submit and must accept the message of the Prophet. However, as I said, this is to convert others, not to destroy them. Unlike Judaism, Islam is not a closed sect, but an open and a universalist religion, which is indeed like Christianity. It should, however, be borne in mind that we repeatedly find in the Quran the idea of fighting the infidels. Fighting the infidels, arms in your hand if necessary. As an infidel, it bothers me a little on the neck. This is his view of Islam. How do Muslim theologians envisage the end of this confrontation with the West and with Zionism? Here is what he has to say. The author of the book, La Guerre Eschatologique. He mentions my name now. As a theologian, Imran Hosein has understood perfectly that the Christian West is now widely Judaized due to an incessant cosmopolitan propaganda in the media. Abortion, homosexuality, lesbianism, adultery are legalized today, he wrote. They have become Jewish. I never said that. He rightly said of the Europeans. I never said that. Imran Hosein also strongly condemns the Western maneuvers in view of the establishment of a world government. For him, in any case, things are very clear. God punished the Jews for the first time with a Babylonian army. He punished them for the second time with a Roman army. And the third time, which is to come, he'll be punishing them with a Muslim army. As for the Christians, who have not been able to preserve themselves from the Jewish nihilism, they should stop worshipping Jesus as if he was God, and they will be forced to recognize him as a prophet. These are my views. We note here, he says, that there's a difference between the tone of the Muslims who recognize Jesus as a prophet and the Jews who in their Talmud insult Christ and believe that he's the son of a prostitute and a Roman soldier. In Muslim eschatology, Jesus is also sometimes referred to as the Mahdi. In Muslim eschatology, Jesus is also sometimes referred to as the Mahdi, one who is guided by God, who will overcome the Antichrist in the end of time. Because there's also an Antichrist according to Muslims. They call him Dajjal. And as for the Christians, the Antichrist, they call him Dajjal. And as for the Christian, the Antichrist who will persecute the faithful before being finally defeated, comes from a Jewish sect, which is not at all surprising. The main difference is that Muslims believe that at the end of time there will be an earthly triumph, as the Jews also believe. But Christians, including Catholics, have abandoned any idea of victory on earth. The Catholic eschatology is confused, to be honest. It is not motivating. As among Jews or among Shiite Muslims who are working to bring their Messiah, in rare texts one may believe in an evangelism of all nations. This is the sixth period of the church, described by the Venerable Bartholomew Hauser, which precedes the great apostasy. In the next period, that of the Antichrist, we read that the only possible victory for Christians in those terrible days is to be defeated, persecuted, tormented, and put to death while remaining faithful, constant, and firm. This example is symptomatic. We see that Christians are disarmed morally, and that the heroes that they could be, and the heroes that could be, are transformed into martyrs. I have quoted extensively from R.A. Ricen because his is one of the most recent works and is widely read now in France, to show how our eschatology has not been presented, and there's such massive misunderstanding of our eschatology. So let us begin by correcting some of the misconceptions. Is it the agenda of Islam to rule the world? Is there anything in the Quran, is there anything in the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, which gives Muslims an agenda of waging perpetual jihad until you establish the rule of Islam over all of mankind? I have not found any such nonsense. I have not found any such nonsense in the Quran or in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But you still have people with schoolboy methodology who will take one isolated verse and use that to build a theory. So let's leave the schoolboys. They're wasting our time. No, Islam does not have a mission to establish the rule of Islam over all of mankind. No. Well then, for what purpose do we wage war? Jihad in Islam, based on the Quran,